The Isle of Birka in the heart of Sweden is home to one of the largest Viking cemeteries ever discovered, which holds over 3,000 graves. More than 1,000 years ago, the town of Birka stood here, a powerful trading hub, the epicenter of the Viking world. Hardened warriors ensured its protection. At their head, a chief of exceptional standing, as shown by the arsenal contained in his grave.
What sets this burial apart is that it doesn't just have weapons, it has all the weapons.
These weapons could only have belonged to a mighty warrior, a big, strong, bearded, fearless man, capable of the worst atrocities, who sailed the seas and oceans in a quest for plunder and glory. The Scourge of the North.
All the cliches of rape and pillage are not just cliches.
For more than a century, this man contributed to forging the image of a Viking warrior with all his cliches. But in the 1970s, a young osteoarchaeologist put forward the crazy hypothesis that the skeleton wasn't that of a man, but that of a woman. Today, a team of experts has revived the investigation and is bent on piercing the mystery of this grave.
Horses, weapons, shields, everything you need to be a professional warrior. And we now know that this warrior was actually a woman.
How did the archaeologists come to this conclusion that is revolutionizing our knowledge of the Vikings? On the ground and in the archives, they investigate and make objects from the grave speak.
A sword like this could be used by a woman. It doesn't take an exceedingly strong physique to use it.
In the lab, scientists try to reveal the clues still present on the remains after more than 1,000 years underground.
When I looked at the innominous bone, it had all the female features.
But the task is not that simple.
A lot of the information is actually missing.
Of all DNA in there, quite a small part belonged to the human from the grave.
Their discoveries could shed new light on the Viking world and establish the existence of the only Viking female warlord and military strategist known to date, the Birka warrior. Sweden is located on the east of the Scandinavian peninsula. Bordered by the Baltic Sea, it is a land of glaciated mountains, vast northern forests, and lakes among the biggest in Europe. 30 kilometers from Stockholm on Lake Malar, Birka is a small island just 3 kilometers long and 1 kilometer wide. From 750 to 950, it was home to one of the most powerful towns in the region, Birka.
1,000 years ago, this was one of the major centers for trade in the Viking world. And there would have been a population of 1,000 persons running around here, living down in the settlement area on the field that you can see below us. Buildings standing closely together, lots of garbage, lots of noise.
So it's a kind of gateway for trade coming from outside, from the Baltic and further afield, down from the continent. And when you trade at Birka, then all the things that you buy and sell there can move off into the countryside. So it's a tremendously important place.
Today, Birka is the most important archaeological site of the Viking Age. Listed as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, the island is home to more than 3,000 graves, more than half of which have not been excavated. An incredible pool of research for generations of archaeologists, which still has surprises in store. The story begins in the late 19th century with an exceptional discovery. By 1878, Hjalmar Stolpe had been leading large-scale archaeological digs at Birka for 7 years. That morning, his team leader Eric discovers a grave with 2 horses next to a large block of granite. He's a man of experience. He knows the presence of horses suggests a high-ranking deceased in a Viking burial chamber. For several days, the team would set about discovering what is hidden under the stone they are forced to dynamite. This grave is numbered BJ 581. BJ for Birka, and 581 because it is the 581st grave unearthed by the archaeologist. The tomb he discovered that day will profoundly mark the history of Viking archaeology.
He knows, even when he finds it, that this is something special. He makes a whole report about it to the Royal Academy. And in that report, one of his phrases is, "This is perhaps the most spectacular burial in this whole field."
In 7 years of excavations, the archaeologist had found swords, sometimes axes, even spears, but never anything like this. The grave contained the full panoply of war weapons: shield, knife, bow and arrow, spear, axe, and sword, making these the remains of one of the greatest warriors in history.
We would think that, well, Viking age, there must be weapons in lots of graves, but they're not, actually. There are several graves that have a weapon or two weapons, but a complete set, that's very, very unusual.
The objects are logged, the bones placed in bags and stored at the Museum of Stockholm, while the weapons set off on a world tour. The myth of the great Viking warrior is born.
Almost any coffee table book that you would pick up on the Vikings would include a picture of this grave, because it really includes everything that we expect to find in a warrior context.
It would take several decades for the deceased from grave BJ 581 to shake up our ideas about Vikings. The Viking warrior has fascinated for 1,000 years. But what do we really know about him? What part does fantasy play in these Norse tales that terrorized medieval Europe?
A Viking was both pirate and merchant. Originally, the word was feminine and referred to a maritime expedition. It came to mean the person who goes off on a boat to get rich and who, according to circumstances and opportunities, would plunder and pillage or would engage in trade.
For almost 3 centuries, between the 8th and 11th, the peoples of the north spread out across Europe thanks to their longships. To the east, where many settled, they were called the Rus or Redheads. They created trade routes, reaching Baghdad via the Caspian Sea and Constantinople via the Black Sea. South of Scandinavia, they colonized England, led raids in France, several times sailing up the Seine to Paris. They bypassed the Iberian Peninsula and attacked and looted in the Mediterranean from North Africa to Italy. In the north, the Vikings stood out for their qualities as explorers. After Scotland and Ireland, they colonized Iceland, then Greenland, and finally discovered America 5 centuries before Christopher Columbus. Whether calling themselves Danes, Normans, or Rus, the Vikings settled in these lands and mixed with the local people. Though they marked world history, their footprint remains shrouded in mystery.
Before the 12th century in Scandinavia, there was very little written text.
For the most part, the Vikings did not write about themselves. They had writing, they had the famous runes, but we find those used mainly on runic memorials, essentially sort of memorials to the dead. But the Vikings did not write their own histories.
So everything that we can read that is contemporary to the Vikings were written by the people that they met. So the people that they attacked, the people that they raided and looted, they were the ones that wrote the history about the Vikings.
And these tales of lawless, savage Vikings who plunder and kill wantonly began in what was not yet England. In 793, on a small island in the northeast of Northumberland, Vikings invaded a monastery sheltering unprotected monks.
When the Norsemen arrived on Lindisfarne, they were seen as the scourge of God. We have detailed testimony. As an advisor to Charlemagne, a certain Alcuin mentions this traumatic arrival in several letters. And you can feel it in the writing. Why did God send this scourge from the north?
This excessive, almost biblical fear would forge the myth of the Viking warrior. This myth was rooted in the rich Norse mythology, the sagas.
When it comes to writings from inside Scandinavia, this is probably the most famous sources on the Vikings of all, the sagas, the great Icelandic literary tradition. The sagas, the word literally just means story, and some people are surprised to discover that the sagas are not from the Viking Age at all. They're from centuries afterwards. So these are products of the Christian Middle Ages, where people are writing about their idea of the Viking Age. So they're writing about a past that they didn't necessarily approve of. Bear in mind, it's not a Christian past. But they give us this extraordinarily detailed picture of Viking society. But we have to ask, is it real?
Nearly a century after the discovery of Hjalmar Stolpa and his men, a large inventory is organized in the archives of the Museum of Stockholm to list all the skeletons discovered to date. A team of osteoarchaeologists is charged with this colossal task. Among them, a young woman named Berit Wilkens. While examining the Viking grave in Birka, she would make an astonishing discovery. She rebuilt skeletons as they were found from Stolpe's sketches. In all, 101 graves representing 117 individuals were analyzed by the young woman, resulting in a 75-page report. The job of a forensic pathologist. Many BJ581 bones have disappeared. The long bones give a clearer picture of the individual's stature.
The skeleton is very tall. It's a long person. It's somebody who's over 1 meter 70 centimeters.
Several elements of a skeleton are used to determine an individual's size. Generally, estimates are made using the lower limbs, and most often the longest of them, the femur, is used. But in the case of BJ581, both femurs are incomplete. So Berit relied on the tibias in better condition. And the results were consistent with how one imagines a man of that time.
BJ581 was about 170 centimeters based on estimations from the tibia, the only completely preserved long bone.
1,000 years ago, Scandinavian men measured on average 1.72 meters, so contrary to medieval beliefs, they were no giants, while a woman's height rarely exceeded 1.60 meters. Size apart, however, another detail attracted Berit's attention. The bones of the forearms are thin and slender, like those of a woman.
Based on the size, this is from a man and this is from a woman. But there are large and tall women, and there are also small and tiny men.
Berit, as a good osteoarchaeologist, looks to the only remaining pelvic bone, BJ581's left hip bone. Although broken into several pieces, some elements may prove to be key to determining gender. Indeed, while male and female skeletons have many differences, this is particularly true of the pelvis.
The inlet of the pelvis is larger and more circular in females than in males. And this is, of course, because there is a baby coming out here.
For the young researcher, no doubt remained. The skeleton of one of the most famous Viking warriors discovered is not that of a man, but a woman.
She made a note when she went through the material that this was probably a female.
However, the bone is damaged and the pubis is missing. To confirm with certainty that the skeleton of BJ581 is indeed that of a woman, the upper part of the skull must be observed.
The margins of the orbita is more rounded in males. And then we have muscle attachments behind the ears and on the occipital bone, which are more pronounced in males as well.
Though present on the drawings done by the archaeologist in 1878, the skull cannot be found today. How could the skull from the most famous Viking grave disappear?
So this material was excavated more than 100 years ago. During the late 19th century, they also had a tendency to separate the cranium from the postcranial bones and put in a separate box. And they have been repacked and put in different boxes and so on.
But it's not in the box in the archive anymore. We think it's out there somewhere.
To date, there's no trace of the skull. The grave BJ581 will remain a man, a great warrior whose remains are still exhibited in museums the world over. Almost 40 years later, during another inventory, Anna Killström, head of Stockholm Museum's Osteoarchaeology department, reviewed Berit Vilkan's report.
In her report, she came actually to the same result that I did. When I looked at the innominous bone, it had all the female features. So this is why I think it was a female.
She announced this at a seminar, and there were two reactions in the room. One of them was me, because I sat there and said, "Wow," really loudly. And the other was a colleague at the back of the room who said, "But that can't be." And I think those two reactions have followed this project all the way along, and they're still with us.
Indeed, many Viking historians are not ready to question decades of representations of legendary warriors. The study is criticized. Is the analysis of bones that have spent over 10 centuries underground sufficient to determine the sex of an individual, especially since more issues are quick to surface?
There was a rumor that all the graves were mixed up and it was impossible to use the skeletal material.
But they hadn't reckoned with the high standards of a passionate man, Hjalmar Stolper. He was a young 34-year-old entomologist when he arrived on the island of Birka in 1871.
He's hoping to find remains of prehistoric insects fossilized in amber. And it's when he goes to the island and sees these thousands of burial mounds, sees the remains of this Viking town, that he begins to change his ideas.
We can read in his notebooks that he's already intrigued by the human remains or the cultural remains.
He then undertook intensive excavations. For 10 years, he spent summer and autumn in Birka. His team uncovered close to 1,100 graves, and he headed up the digs with a rigor and precision that was unprecedented for its time. Hundreds of drawings, inventories, and notes are carefully recorded. A gold mine that still hasn't revealed all its secrets.
To me, he's this great scientist because he left everything in order, making it possible for us more than 100 years later to go back to his excavations, trust what he did, and do something new. We can have a new interpretation based on his excellent groundwork. He was a pioneer in that sense.
And indeed, 150 years later, Stolper's rigor is still legible. Thanks to him, ownership of the bones of BJ 581 is beyond doubt. They have been carefully and individually marked with India ink.
All the 581 bones are marked with 581. It's not magic. It's just proper science.
Science which, in the person of Hjalmar Stolper, took priceless precautions. But scientific observation always leaves room for interpretation. Could an osteoarchaeological study, however painstaking and precise, shake our vision of the Vikings? Are our fantasies of ferocious men plying the seas in search of gold and slaves just an illusion? If the benchmark warrior is a woman, then the image of fearless, bloodthirsty combatants seems shaky. The myth of the male Viking warrior will not surrender so easily. Other arguments must be found to convince the scientific community.
Using the study of bones alone to determine that is never completely secure, and we needed to be sure. And that's what the genomics, the DNA, have given us.
That's when the Stockholm University geneticists stepped in. Their mission, to make BJ 581's DNA speak.
It looked as if it would be an easy case, right? There's a lot of material there, and it's not looking super bad. So I was surprised to find out how bad preservation is on this particular site.
Over 1,000 years, millions of microorganisms, bacteria, and fungi have flourished since. Their DNA are mixed with the skeletons, the genetic trace fading with the centuries.
The DNA in this particular grave, it wasn't a lot. This was heavily degraded. And of all DNA in there, quite a small part belonged to the human from the grave. I think it was less than 5%.
Women have 2 X chromosomes, while men have only 1. They have a Y chromosome. It's therefore sufficient to look for a Y chromosome to determine the gender.
We found X chromosomes and we found other autosomes as well, but there was no Y chromosome there. We looked for it, but it wasn't there.
This person had 2 X chromosomes. There is no doubt at all is a female person.
The genetic proof is irrefutable. The skeleton in grave BJ581 is that of a woman, a Viking woman. She lived between the 9th and 10th centuries. At that time, in Scandinavia, the Vikings inhabited a rural world and lived from animal husbandry, agriculture, hunting, and fishing.
It's a society that is divided up into small communities, family-based rural societies.
Scandinavian society is patriarchal, but women there enjoy many freedoms compared to counterparts in the Christian world. They can inherit, divorce, and sometimes even choose their husband. Authority is exercised locally by the clans themselves.
These are stateless societies where there's no supreme authority that protects all the people through a police force and organized justice.
Law was not the province of a king or a lord. It was governed by a popular assembly, more often than not without any kind of violence. So behind this rather sort of wild Viking image is actually the opposite, a total respect for the rule of law.
However, not everyone benefits from the protection of Viking laws. Slaves made up a large part of the population. In Birka, the trading town where the woman from grave BJ581 lived, certain clues tend to indicate that a large number were in transit here.
We found a lot of Arab coins, the famous Islamic dirhams made from silver. It is very likely that they were exchanged for slaves who'd be on their way to the Mediterranean world.
An Arab coin was found in the grave of BJ581, as well as weights used to measure out the precious metal. Do the artifacts she was buried with tell us about her role in Birka? And more generally, what was a woman's role?
It's hard to speak of equality. There's a kind of division of labor. We talk of men going to sea who'd sometimes leave for an entire season. So when the man isn't there, someone has to carry on running the farm or running the shop. She will also manage the staff, including the slaves attached to the estate or the workshop.
Was the woman from grave BJ581 a merchant? Did she run a workshop? Were the weapons those of her husband lost on a distant expedition? Or were they buried together? Other skeletons have disappeared, totally decomposed in Birka's many graves.
One of the questions that's been raised about the interpretation of 581, is there just one body in the grave, or could there have been a second one? And the implication is the second one, it must be a man. Actually, we do find double burials in the Viking Age. Usually men and women buried together. It's very hard to know what their relationship is, whether they're a couple, whether one is a servant of the other, we don't know. So the idea of a double burial is not crazy. They're never common, but they do exist. If you look at 581, it's very clear. Stolper writes explicitly that this is the only body in the grave. There is nothing in his documentation to suggest otherwise. If we look at the objects in the burial, they're all grouped around the skeleton that we have. There are no other bones labeled as being from the grave. We've even DNA tested the different parts of the skeleton, and it's from the same individual. There's no doubt at all that she was alone in the burial.
What made this tomb famous for 150 years are its weapons. But could they still be used in combat?
Finding weapons is not that unusual in Viking archaeology. We find them sometimes in graves, we find them on settlements. We know that they were a very common part of the material world. What sets this burial apart is that it doesn't just have weapons, it has all the weapons.
Indeed, it's a veritable arsenal. There's a war axe, a combat knife, 2 spears of different types, 2 shields, no fewer than 25 arrowheads, and, of course, a sword. Analysis can provide crucial information about the deceased occupant of the burial chamber.
We are fascinated by weapons today just because of the fact that they are power objects. If you can look at them the right way, you can learn things about the people who owned them and used them, and also about the people who made them. They tell you fascinating stories.
Viking weapons left their mark on the minds of peoples who were attacked, particularly the axe.
The Norsemen were axe people. They were famous for their skill in the use of the axe. This is a very swift and devastating weapon, specially made for fighting. This is a weapon to kill an opponent in a single blow.
The grave also contained 2 spears, the most popular weapon in the Middle Ages, and particularly effective.
The spear is the weapon of choice of the god Odin, who is the god of war. These are not for throwing, these are for close quarter fighting. It's a weapon for the battlefield.
Spears are also less expensive. It means warriors can afford to fully equip themselves. But the most important weapon since the Bronze Age is, without doubt, the sword. In tandem with the shield, it required the utmost fitness and training, as well as qualified manpower that was rare for the time.
You cannot make a high-quality sword if you're a general-purpose blacksmith. That's outside your skill. The people who made these weapons, the smiths and the craftsmen who created them, were specialists. I think this is the work of perhaps 1 month to make, from the raw material to the finished piece. And it could be the work of several different craftsmen who were specialized in different parts of the project.
Analysis of the weapons is unequivocal. These are not ceremonial objects, but weapons used by trained professionals. Mastering such a sword earns a warrior the respect of the people.
The sword has its position because it being expensive and connected to people with wealth and influence, but also because it's a uniquely efficient personal weapon. So owning a sword was also making a point that you belong to an elite in society. In the grave of BJ 581, we have a sword. It's a beautiful sword, but it's also a common sword. A sword that someone who needs a good sword. It's the sword of a warrior.
But how far can we link the grave's objects and the woman who occupies it? Maybe the answer lies there, where she is buried and where she lived, in Birka. On the island, hundreds of mounds of earth betray the presence of burials, sometimes overlaid by a rock as a gravestone.
Sometimes they put up stones on top of the graves, and when they're about the stones like this, that indicates that it was a male grave, and the female graves had an egg-shaped rounded stone on top of them.
When Hjalmar Stolpa arrived in 1871, he was captivated by these hundreds of stones. 7 years later, his men are digging at the foot of a 2.5-meter diameter block northeast of the island, less than 100 meters from the shore. He doesn't mention in his notes the shape of the stone, which was dynamited.
The 581 is this one. And if we imagine this huge stone boulder on top of the grave, it would have been highly visible from the sea. There were no trees here in the Viking Age, so it would have been almost like a landmark when you entered into the harbor of the town. So it was a chamber, a subterranean chamber made of wood, like a room underneath the earth, slightly less than 4 meters long and approximately 2 meters wide. So in this part, there would have been a ledge with 2 horses, cramped together, 2 horses very tightly packed. And then we have the chamber with the dead woman. When she was found, she was lying slightly on her side. So the sword would have been behind her back, at least in the position that she had when she was found. There would have been 1 shield at the top of the grave, in the head end, and 1 shield at the bottom, in the foot end. She would have had a quiver and a bow, so her archery equipment would have been to her right side, so to say. 1 spear in the cauldron, 1 spear to the left side of her. We have horses, weapons, shields, everything you need to be a professional warrior. And we now know that this warrior was actually a woman.
A woman in what is unquestionably an important grave. But what rank did she hold?
People decided to bury her here in this burial chamber with her weapons and her horses. They wanted to honor this woman because her honor is the group's honor.
A grave is not a true mirror of an individual's life. It's a kind of reduced format play, so everything is staged, everything is carefully chosen.
What message did her relatives want to leave?
It depends on what the deceased went through in life. What were their convictions, their beliefs, and also on the objectives of the survivors. The deceased never buried themselves.
To decipher what may have been the staging of the burial, archaeologists observed the remains of BJ 581. The body is lying on its side. The majority of other graves in the town are in a conventional position, but several present the same particularity.
We know that the person buried there was sitting down in a chair, perhaps even on the saddle from the horses.
The sitting position of the deceased gives them a certain stature. But what is the meaning of this posture?
If you look at what the dead are looking at, there they are sitting in their graves. All of them are looking into the town. Are they guarding it? Are they protecting it? We don't know, but there's some reason why they're positioned as they are.
Viking funeral rites are closely linked to their religion. They venerated many gods, which earned them the label pagan from the rest of Christian Europe.
If you ask people today, what do you know about the Vikings? The one thing that everybody knows is that they go to Valhalla when they die.
Valhalla is the place where valiant warriors fallen in combat are chosen by the Valkyrie warriors to join the fort of Asgard, where Odin, god of gods, reigns.
There's more than one way to reach the beyond. You can be buried, you can be cremated, buried with animals, without animals, with weapons, without weapons.
Cremation is by far the most common treatment of the dead, and that's actually what we find in most of the Birka burials. Inhumation, burying a body, is much more rare. We normally think of Viking burials as kind of like a machine to send the dead person into the next world. Probably most of them are. But occasionally you also find the idea that they're actually not going anywhere. They're supposed to stay in the grave. And it may well be that the dead actually live there. Maybe the person in 581 lived in that grave.
If the deceased in grave BJ 581 were to live in this chamber facing the town of Birka, why does she have a military arsenal with her?
Inside each individual grave, it's always different in terms of precisely what objects are there, where are those objects, and probably the sequence in which it's placed. Everything is very exact. They don't just throw some things in a hole. There is a meaning. We have a couple of eyewitness descriptions of Viking funerals, and they're full of music, of drinking, of eating, of sex, of violence, actually. Killing animals, even sometimes killing people.
The graves in Birka are sometimes richly stocked. The richest women wore fabulous jewelry. Was the woman in BJ 581 buried with her personal possessions? Weapons when others have tools or jewels? Did she know how to use this warrior's arsenal?
We have to be careful with making that jump. So loads of weapons equals a warrior. We have to be clear that that is an assumption we're making, but it's quite a good one. The one thing we can be sure of is that the decision to fill, in this case 581, with weapons makes a connection between that dead person, this precise person, and all those weapons. That is an idea of warriorness, of warriorhood. Does it reflect who they were in life? We think it does. Nobody had any problem at all about the warrior interpretation of this burial, all the while this person was male. And suddenly lots of people have a problem with the warrior part the moment this person is female. And that doesn't add up.
An example of the power of women was unearthed in Norway. The Osberg ship is one of the grandest tombs ever discovered. Dating from the first half of the 9th century, it was occupied by 2 women.
Women could be queens, women could be slaves, and all points in between on the social scale, just like men. They have pretty much sole control over the household, over the farm economy. Women can also be merchants, and this is a lot of power. This is the things that govern the viability of the community. One of the things that we find a lot in women's graves is keys. The key opens a lock. In other words, if you have the key, you control who gets to the things that are valuable enough to lock away. That's a significant thing.
But what do we know about real female warriors? Could women really take part in the fighting, or is that still the domain of myth and legend?
There actually are some rare instances of women fighting. There is a battle fought by the Byzantines against the Rus, these Scandinavian peoples of the eastern rivers. The Rus lose their battle, and the Byzantines describe how they go over the battlefield afterwards. They're picking up the weapons and the armor. It's just like a list of things they found. And they find women among the Rus dead, women in armor, who have been fighting them along with the men. In Ireland, there is a source from the 12th century, the War of the Irish with the Foreigners. And there's one that relates a series of 10th century raids on Ireland, the same date as the Birka grave, in which it lists the names of the commanders of the Viking fleets. The last name in the list, it talks about the fleet of the Red Girl. She's a Viking, she's a ship's captain, and she commands a fleet. That is quite an impressive package of roles for one person. So those women are there in the documentary record. I don't think the new work around 581 should surprise us in the slightest.
It's so important that this person is buried with this sword beside. You can tell just by looking at the sword in that grave that this is a person who respects and knows what the sword is, who is familiar with its use, and whose identity is defined partly by owning this weapon.
Mastering combat techniques and weapons takes many years of practice and training. To become a master of arms, the woman from grave BJ 581 must have spent a large part of her life with warriors.
Being a fighter is not the same thing as being a warrior. You become a fighter in a situation where you must tackle enemies who are attacking you. A warrior is someone, male or female, who makes war their main activity. The way of life and the social role of a warrior extend far beyond just fighting.
Some archaeologists have wondered, does a female warrior have the physical capacities needed to wield the weapons of this era on a battlefield, particularly the sword?
A sword like this could be used by a young person, could be used by a woman. It doesn't take an exceedingly strong physique to use it. In fact, it's well balanced. It's nimble in the hand. It's built for speed and precision, and it's to be used together with a shield as a unity. Of course, it takes lifelong training to learn how to use it properly. Look at the swordsmen like elite sportsmen. These were people in society who had active lifestyle. They were healthy until they died.
A life dedicated to war inevitably has its share of injuries. Have not years of training and raids left traces on the bones of the deceased BJ 581, substantiating her warrior status?
You can never say it's a warrior. I mean, we can see a victim of violence.
We can imagine the violence of fighting and daily training. The impacts caused by handling weapons can produce characteristic injuries.
When you raise your arm and you try to defend yourself, you may fracture your radius or ulna. You can see that in assault victims. But these kind of fractures may also occur indirectly when you fall on an outstretched hand. So these fractures in themselves can't be used as evidence for fighting. You need something more.
The bones of BJ 581's forearms do not, however, reveal anything.
Well, in case of BG 581, I couldn't see any types of fractures on the forearms.
This absence of trauma raises the question of her participation in the fighting. From this point of view, is she an exception to her male warrior colleagues in the vast majority among the Vikings?
The prevalence of weapon-related trauma in materials from the Viking Age is fairly low compared to medieval churchyard.
Could this paradox be explained by specific war techniques enabled by the use of a formidable war machine, the longship? Its flat bottom and lightness ensured supremacy of the seas and waterways.
Depending on circumstances, presence of wind, surprise attack, they could choose sail or oar power.
But longships ensured a swift retreat before the local troops arrived. As the Vikings were few in number, they opted for one-off surprise attacks where they were less likely to lose life or limb. For almost 3 centuries, the Vikings overwhelmed Europe with their bloody raids. Their commando attacks were painstakingly prepared. They knew where and when to attack.
The Viking is adventurous, curious. However, he doesn't just go anywhere, anyhow. He is well informed. He knows the world around him well, especially the Western world.
They strike, for example, on Sunday during Mass. The attack is brutal to discourage any rebellious intent. But another reason that might explain the absence of injury on skeletons from Viking graves, like the one in BJ 581, is the choice of their privileged, defenseless targets, their future slaves.
The Viking warrior celebrate things like courage and skill at arm. In reality, they were quite often the cowards. They were opportunistic pirates. They went deep inland over the rivers and hitting their opponents where they were soft and unguarded. And comes a shipload of hungry Vikings, taking slaves and taking everything they owned just to have something to sell the next market down the coast. That's not really a fight. That's just a slaughter.
These combat techniques may have allowed the warrior in BJ 581 to escape injury. And she who chose to be a warrior settled in Birka, a merchant's town and a magnet for greed.
Birka is exactly the sort of place that Vikings like to raid, and that means a Viking market town is just as vulnerable as everybody else's market towns.
There were ramparts, there were defensive structures, there were harbors, piled barricades out into the waterfront, and a hill fort. We're standing within the hill fort at the moment, protecting, defending, but also controlling all the activities down in the town.
To make the merchants feel safe, the town housed 40 to 60 warriors in the garrison at the foot of the fortress. Many among them were archers, in order to keep intruders at a distance from the towers and the walkways. A vast quantity of arrowheads were found in the earth around the ramparts, proof that the warriors were active during the life of the town. BJ 581 used special three-faceted arrowheads capable of piercing armor. In this troop of heterogeneous warriors, she must have occupied an important position. Because in addition to her full arsenal, which only she and another warrior in Birka possessed, she was buried with horses, animals only found with high-ranking dignitaries. The fact that there are so many graves with horses in Birka shows that the town was exceptionally rich. But here again, the female warrior BJ 581 stands out. Her burial place contains 2 horses with stirrups and bits. Perhaps it was to help her join Valhalla and Odin, whose horse had 8 legs. The role that a warrior could have played in the troop may be clarified by another object near her remains.
On her lap, there was a pouch with gaming pieces and dice, and by her side there was a gaming board.
It's rare to find a complete set, and it's rare to find a board. When we do find those things, especially when they're very close to the body, they are almost always in graves of high-ranking military commanders. There are a few other graves like that on Birka, a few other iron-bound gaming boards, but not many. They are all the graves of the super rich. We don't know exactly, but it's probably Nefertafel, which is the main Viking board game. It's like chess in a way. It's effectively a war game. The idea is you have to take the king. So if we know that complete sets of games like this are associated with military leaders, they're associated with an idea of military strategy, that certainly makes precisely those associations with this grave. This is one of the reasons why we think this person is a high-ranking commander.
A warrior at the pinnacle of the military hierarchy, justified from the archaeological point of view by the grave's location on the island.
The 581 chamber grave lies in a little cluster of other chamber burials, part of the cemetery north of the hill fort.
People that were buried here in the other graves show that they were among the highest status people in Birka society.
But archaeology can also help us understand how the female warrior was seen at the end of her life. Perhaps she distinguished herself through heroic acts. Whatever the case, the people gave her the place of honor, a place apart.
So, a middle-aged woman with a high strategic and military tactical knowledge. And she was placed here prominently. There was also a huge stone boulder marking it. The first thing that would catch your eye when you would sail into the harbor of Birka, marking that this was probably somebody that was important to the town, to the trade, and to the warriors living very close by in the garrison.
A woman certainly respected, but also very probably feared, because she was above all a Viking warrior.
All the cliches of rape and pillage are not just cliches. So presumably, This woman is in charge of things that we would regard as atrocities.
We'll probably never know how the warrior from grave BJ 581 died. A text refers to the swift disappearance of Birka in the middle of the 11th century, perhaps one of the terrifying raids of which the Vikings knew the secret. Historians unanimously date the end of the Viking Age as 1066, after their defeat at Stamford Bridge by the Anglo-Saxons. Several weeks later, another descendant of the Vikings, William the Conqueror, seized England. In less than 3 centuries, the Vikings left their mark on history. Though their identity disappeared following their conversion to Christianity and their deliberate assimilation in the colonized countries, the Vikings left behind them a rich heritage. Their popularity remains unequaled. Popularity that will now have to rely on the impressive female warrior of Birka.
A while ago, someone asked Charlotte and I if we'd like to get in a time machine and go back and meet this person, and our immediate reaction was no. I think she'd be terrifying, actually.
I'm not sure I would like to meet her, but of course I would like to see her from afar. I think that would be enough, actually.
Though seen from afar, the journey of this charismatic woman has left traces that we are rediscovering today.
The Viking lifestyle, especially if you were a warrior, it was all about being remembered. And I actually think that she would have loved for us to be standing here today talking about her and talking about her achievements more than 1,000 years later.
The story of the warrior from grave BJ 581 still holds many mysteries. As for Viking women, their story is just beginning to be told.